Hello, we're live. Okay. Welcome. Just a quick reminder today, instead of the This Is Not Therapy Hour, we're doing another recording of the Effective Artistry podcast. And also, my phone is still on because my wife is still very pregnant and the baby hasn't arrived yet. So, apologies if that makes any noise, but turn it over to Mike.
Well, hi and welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Wang, and I am the head of school over at Fusion Academy. We're located in Oak Brook, Illinois. And we're a private school, grades 6 through 12, and we specialize in serving kids in a one-on-one model of instruction. And we work with all sorts of kids, gifted, neurodiverse, and those in just the need of a little extra support academically, emotionally, or executive function-wise. Welcome to our 7th episode of Season 2 of Effective Artistry, Executive Functioning in the Neurodivergent Mind, featuring Brandon Tessers, LCPC. And today we're on the topic of advertising's influence on our behaviors. Before we get started, a reminder that today's stream will be recorded and we'll be rebroadcasting it in podcast form so you can consume it at any time that you want. And we're currently streaming on Twitch and Facebook and YouTube, so be sure to keep that chat box full if there's anything that you want us to talk more about, or if you want us to shift gears, anything that you want. I'll help moderate and read the questions as they come in. Today, we have a very special guest on the stream. We got Joe Ramsky. He's a brand strategy manager at Etiquette. That's spelled Ettakit. And while he's not creating the next big ideas in marketing, he's also a freelance writer, a professional actor, and theater artist. And that's it for the introductions. Those are all out of the way. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to our featured guest and host, Brandon Tessers and Joe Ramsky.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Mike. There's so much energy in the introduction. It perks me up a little bit. And one piece of context I wanted to add, just because it might be relevant in interpreting what our conversation as we go along. Joe and I met initially through his now fiance, then girlfriend, Sarah Geis, who is a wonderful person and one of our executive functioning coaches at Effective Artistry. We're also both playwrights, so we've read each other's plays. And
yes.
So we've known each other a bit here. I just figured I might say something, or you might say something that's not going to make sense if people don't know we've known each other.
Sure. Yeah.
But anyway, thank you for being with us, Joe. We had a great conversation setting up for all this. Why don't we start? I know Mike gave the intro, but if you want to just kind of tell our viewers, listeners, whatever, a bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thank you both for having me on. Very excited to be here. To add some context, I guess, to the summary that Mike gave. Yeah. So my job is a brand strategy manager for a small creative agency here in Chicago, Illinois, called Etiquette. Sounds like, the sort of like dinner table etiquette, if you will, but spelled a bit differently. And I came into that job initially through just copywriting. I started off as a copywriter there, primarily for social stuff, for web stuff and whatnot. And then as I kind of moved further into the company, which is only just about 2.5 years old at this point, I kind of veered more in the direction of building brands, essentially, and helping existing brands sort of rebrand themselves, and new brands really kind of find their voice and figure out what specifically they almost knocked over my computer. What specifically they want to say and how they want to essentially carry themselves in whatever field or industry that they're in. And it's very interesting kind of coming through that path. I had spent the sort of like previous 8-9 years of my professional life, quote unquote, working for a couple of large e-commerce companies, both in sort of copywriting and writing adjacent positions. And then also I spent a little bit of time in sales. I spent a little bit of time in like customer service. So I've kind of like run the gamut, I guess you could say, when it comes to the entire like funnel that people would go through when sort of you talk about both marketing and like e-commerce in general. And the reason that I was sort of interested in this kind of work in the first place is, as you both said, I am a writer sort of by trade, by night, I guess. And it's always been very fascinating to me how much, I guess, how similar the two sort of industries are in a way, and also the two practices when it comes to talking about branding and brands and marketing in general, and how it always comes back to what story that you're telling, I guess, is really the sort of core compass that I use when I'm doing my job, I guess. So the intersection between my job and then also my trade as an artist and everything is always something that's very, very fun to think about. And it's most people don't really think that there would be much cross-pollination, but I am here to dispel that rumor, and there is in fact a ton of cross-pollination.
I love that. Yeah, I think of like the difference between art and marketing, and I say this all the time. I'm very weird. I have all kinds of specific definitions of things in my head because I just need to think that way. To me, the two are split by one very fine delineation. So there is tons of overlap because it's all about putting something out there with the intention of having an impact on an audience that you can't anticipate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like as opposed to communicating one-on-one like we're doing right now, I'm interacting with you and can read your responses and adapt. Whereas if I'm writing something that's intended to be art, or if I'm theoretically doing marketing, which is not something I actually do, this is the entirety of the marketing I do, what we're doing right now. That I'm creating something and I'm trying to have an impact on people. The only difference for me is in art, I don't care so much about what the impact is. I'm just trying to express what I express. I hope it has an impact, whatever it is. And in marketing, it seems like you care more about, I'm trying to have a specific impact on future unknown people who are observing it. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. I it's funny that you mentioned that too, because I always, both when it comes to playwriting and making art and everything, but then especially for branding, you always have to be cognizant of that audience. And for marketing, that is the main thing that you have to be cognizant of, right? Is just how is the audience going to receive this, and then also how best can you communicate to them what your brand is about, and then also what, to be honest, you're trying to either sell to them or get them to do, and in most cases buy from you, or get them to believe in sort of what your brand is espousing and the sort of values that your brand is espousing. And so being very aware of the audience is essential when it comes to branding, because if you're, for example, if you're working with like a coffee brand, for example, and you don't really have a good idea of the person that you're sort of selling to, there are billions of coffee brands out there, in the United States alone. So that's very often the sort of point of entry for both people who are creating brands and starting businesses, but then also for us, because we need to tell that story to that customer as to why they should care about the brand. And not only that, but once we tell them that, we should also say, like, on top of that, these are the things that we already know that you are going to love about this brand, because this brand also holds the same values probably that you do. They care about the same things. They're interested in the same things. And so you really kind of have to anticipate that if you know who your audience is and what they're going to be drawn to. Which is all part of the larger story that you're telling, as I said.
Right. Well, the most effective communication happens when I am paying very close attention to the person that I'm communicating with and getting a sense of how they're interpreting me, because it's all valid, even if it's different than what I intended it to be interpreted as. And I wanted to just quickly say before, because we're going to get off into all kinds of things. That's how we do.
Sure.
What the thinking was behind having you on to talk about this. There's kind of a old joke among, I don't know how old it is, but a joke among mathematicians that engineering is just applied physics and physics is just applied math, that math is like the most pure. I really do think marketing in a sense is like applied psychology, right? That because you can only anticipate who is going to be, seeing or hearing or reading or whatever it is that you're putting out there to a limited extent, that there's a lot of reliance on general trends of what the average or normative person will interpret things as, or the normative person within a specific group. So I think it's a fascinating way to look at communication and psychology in this like very particular application. But that's what we're going to be talking about, because I don't know, I'd probably be pretty boring if I was trying to talk about branding. I don't know much about it. But yeah, so talking about it as narrative, right? Because that's really what, in terms of executive functioning, narrative is data compression. You can't like know everything there is to know about a thing. So we take some important elements of it and leave others out and try to like identify what it is that matters to get across. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could talk a bit about your process, in specific terms of what is it what is your approach, or how have you found utility in kind of helping to narrow down, of all the things that happen to be true about a brand or a product, how do you identify which ones seem to be the most important ones to contain in the narrative that you put out?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's so tricky to kind of boil it down to one specific thing. But honestly, because we do have a whole process where we take a new company through this branding process. We talk to the founders. We kind of get an idea out of their own mouths of what they want the brand to be and what they want it to stand for and all that stuff that I had mentioned before. But to me, the point where the story often starts is the kind of emotional response and just sort of emotions in general that we want the audience or customer to feel upon sort of engaging with the narrative of the brand, if you will. Much like in any sort of story in any sort of medium, one of my favorite stories I'm going to use as an example is The Lord of the Rings. We're all familiar with either the books or the films. Everyone very often, and I think especially in the past couple of years, talk about how they go to those stories to feel hopeful. The films especially, I think, do a very good job of sort of peddling the narrative of like having hope and holding hope in a time when hope is in short supply. And so that is what that story does and what that story gives to people. And so with branding, it's actually not too dissimilar in that the narrative that the brand or company or what have you is espousing is giving some sort of emotion to people that is meant to fill some sort of need. There are even a few different terms that people will throw around when it comes to like marketing messaging that often sort of use emotions as different points of leverage. One of the ones that I feel like is a little bit more prolific is the idea behind fear-based marketing, where you are playing to someone's sort of fears that something is going to happen to them or their loved ones, and so they need to fill that need somehow. And so what do they end up doing? They end up buying a security system for their home, and they know that is taking care of that fear and providing a sense of safety for them in their home. And so a lot of that story is often whatever security company they probably ended up purchasing their system from probably use that in the narrative that they tell their customers, like, yes, we offer a certain level of safety guarantee, a level of protection guarantee that can literally put your fears at ease. It's a bit of a cliche, but it serves that kind of function.
Sure. And what you're saying in that specific example then is that what you would want to do is evoke the fear first and then offer the promise of, but now we can remove this fear that we just created in you, or at least evoked in you.
Yes. And that's not, I shouldn't say that that's the only example. I just want to clarify that is fear is always sort of a very sort of evident and ready example for anything, I feel like, just because it's such a strong and palpable emotion that we have all felt at some point over something. But even just when it comes to feelings of joy, feelings of relief, there are so many brands and products out there that every day, if you're on the internet and you see an ad like on the side of your screen when you're searching in Google or you're on Facebook or something like that, every single ad is trying to essentially peddle some sort of narrative that is saying like, hey, this desire or emotional need that you're feeling, we have a solution for that. And here is, the narrative is sort of tied up in how it's a solution and how that company or brand provides that solution with their specific product or service. But it always comes back to that specific emotion that they're looking to evoke in a way and tell the consumer, we have a solve for that, as it were.
Sure. You and I talked about, it's been a couple months, I think, actually, since our conversation prior to this. We talked about like features-driven selling versus solution-based selling or client-focused selling. Different people have different terms for it. Mm-hmm. But the idea that, the older model of selling, of sales, I don't know if sales and marketing, maybe that's a distinction that you can help me understand between, but that the older model tended to be, look at this cool new thing we've developed. Don't you want it now? Like, look at all the features that it has. Whereas over time, things have shifted more to that solution-focused or client-focused, where it's, let's find a problem that you have and then offer you a solution for it instead of just trying to pique your interest. Mm-hmm. Which in terms of executive functioning makes a lot of sense, especially, in what you're talking about with emotion too. emotions are more broadly applicable and predictable than specific cognitive things, right? Specific thoughts that people might have.
Sure.
It's a lot easier to make guesses because emotion is kind of more narrowly constrained. It's a more limited range than like all the possible things you could think. So I'm curious about, because I'm still kind of thinking about that same question. And I should throw this out too, that I don't know if it would be easier to have like an example of a brand that you work with if somebody wants like, you know, an extra free hour of marketing, or to pick a hypothetical or something, just to have specifics to talk about rather than the broad process. But, you know, I guess I can already see things like, okay, do we tap into an existing problem that we just remind people of and then offer a solution? Do we find people that we don't even need to remind them of the problem because they're very aware of it and offer a solution? Do we create a problem and then offer a solution? I'm sure different ones go different ways, but maybe you could talk a bit about, you know, the narrative you create is trying to accomplish a purpose. Do you start by looking at what that purpose is first and then work backward?
Yes. And very often, especially in this day and age, I think it's almost imperative for any company that is starting up and wants to have some sort of success. They need to have that sort of kernel of what problem they're trying to solve, and also what sort of change they're looking to bring to whatever industry that they're in, before they go to market, just because that's so central to the brand's story. And as you even said, like, that problem, you almost can't really identify what we call a sort of bullseye consumer without knowing what the problem is that you're trying to solve. There is one client that I can't say a name of necessarily, but they are working in a space where they're essentially trying to examine the relationship between food and wellness, for lack of a more, you know, succinct descriptor. And so they kind of came to the drawing board, if you will, with this idea of like, hey, we are looking to kind of solve some of the wellness and health issues for a client base that is, you know, a little older, and they're starting to experience specific problems when it comes to various health factors and whatnot. And we think that there is some sort of linkage there in regards to food. And so how do we think, based on what we already know in terms of research and whatnot, that we can create a line of products that help solve these specific problems, that are, instead of being in sort of a more medicinal space, being more food driven. So that's I guess kind of a very surface level example. Another example that I will give that is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to make a suggestion, but maybe you don't need it, of, you know, we can do this, we can talk about things, or we can just demonstrate them. So I can just manipulate you into giving me a free marketing consultation right now. And we can use Effective Artistry as the example. And that way you don't have to worry about talking around things. And you can kind of walk me through, or we can demonstrate what it looks like to kind of approach this.
Yeah, I love that idea. So yeah, for Effective Artistry, for example, so in terms of the company, I know a little bit of this, but can you tell me just really quick in like a few short sentences why you started the company?
Oh man. See, this is my problem, right? Is that I don't condemn. I'm very complex, right? Like why I can be helpful to many people is because I can go further into the nuance and the complexity than usually they do. Maybe I'm answering the question by saying this. I don't know.
You are, but go on.
The flip side of that is that I have a really hard time trying to condense it down, because kind of the whole point, I guess this is a bit of an answer to the question. The whole point is that I see these things that are put out for mass distribution. And in order to be able to do that, they have to simplify. And those simple things may come from really great and complex and well thought out premises. I think of like mathematical formulas, right? Like Pythagorean theorem, we know as a squared plus b squared equals c squared, applies to a right triangle, blah, blah, blah. But when that formula was developed, the person who developed it had to do an incredible amount of innovative mathematics to arrive at the conclusion. And then now everybody just has the formula, right? Nobody needs to know all the stuff behind it. The problem with that is if you apply the formula and it doesn't work, then what do you do? And so particularly in the space that we're in, especially with neurodiversity, but really it's applicable to everyone, is when the simple thing, when the formula, when you've learned the formula and you learn when you're supposed to apply it and you apply it, but it doesn't work, there's a tendency for people to then assume that the deficiency lies within the individual, that the formula is flawless. What you're supposed to do is what you're supposed to do. You're just supposed to do, make lists, and that's how you get by. And when it doesn't work, people then say, I'm broken, I'm bad, I got to try harder at this. Whereas what we're trying to do is say, no, the formula is useful. It's widespread because it's widely helpful. But when it doesn't work, we got to get further into the complexity of things. So there you go. How do you market something that's all about how marketing is by necessity dropping complexity?
Well, first of all, I love that. I've heard you talk about why you started Effective Artistry. Both you and Sarah, my fiance, I've heard both of you sort of talk about the reason for the company's existence. But I really love that because, for one, explaining the sort of methodology, I think, in those terms is really helpful to both, people who are neurodivergent, but then also someone who is not. But even just kind of, getting that short sort of piece of info from you, I could sort of go to the drawing board and say, like, okay, so the company's main mission, from what you've just told me, is to essentially help simplify life for those who identify as neurodivergent by giving them a new set of formulas or a new toolkit to essentially navigate the issues that they face in their lives. And that's painting in very broad strokes, but you've already identified the problem that you're looking to solve in there. And in doing that, you've also identified, like I said, what we call the bullseye consumer. So the sort of very specific, or as most specific as you could get, segment of customers, potential customers, who would most identify with the problem that you're trying to solve and the means through which you're trying to solve it. So if I were to go ahead and create a brand strategy for Effective Artistry, we would kind of start with that, which is sort of the company's mission, which is to me always like the heart and soul of the brand and like why it exists in the first place, which is everything that you just mentioned to me. Now, in terms of how we want to talk about that mission, there are a couple of things that I would suggest to you in regards to how we could convey that story. We could use a version of the exact same story that you told me, but in order to kind of appeal to more people, you may want to think about reframing it as your personal story and how that kind of intersected with this realization that, if I were to start my own business, my own practice, essentially, that's specialized in this thing, I would be able to help more people than in my sort of previous position, and really kind of focus on an area that I think needs further focus, further development. Or you could kind of focus it more so on the team. You could keep it focused just specifically to the problem. It kind of depends on again how you think that message will be best received by the people that you're trying to help.
I just want to briefly call out someone in the chat which I think is probably some pretty good copywriting, but you're the expert, Joe. They said Effective Artistry provides customized solutions for executive function challenges.
Love it.
Like.
Yep.
It's very like corporate-y. It's like, synthesized, solution oriented. I don't know corporate jargon.
I don't mean to interrupt Brandon's private consultation, but I'm wondering, Joe, like, you've been in this industry for a while now, and you've learned a lot of things about what strategies industry uses. I'm wondering how does that carry into your personal life beyond like marketing yourself for a new position or job? Like, how have you seen yourself? Are there any things that you've adapted or seen in yourself that you've applied?
That's a great question, Mike. I don't just consider. So this is a kind of a weird example, but so Sarah and I are a lot of our regular weekday routines involve like making dinner and then just watching a little television. And we have a couple of streaming services, but I have refused to. We have Hulu, and I've refused to not get the non-ad version of Hulu because I actually enjoy picking apart commercials these days because I'm a psychopath and my job has ruined me. But no, that's not true. It's just so interesting to me because a lot of TV commercials, especially, I'm a child of the 90s, so I very much I was raised on television in one part, And there are some commercials, and this is what good advertising does, that are at this point embedded into my DNA. Because I live in the Chicagoland area, the Empire carpet commercial, I think once I'm 85, I will still be able to recite the jingle from the 90s Empire carpet commercials. But and that's kind of a whole separate segment of this. But it's very interesting to me to kind of see what different companies both are doing currently, are still doing, especially in light of the pandemic, because there was a while where a lot of companies were really trying to show that they had like a very humanistic streak, and they were like, we get it, we totally know where you're coming from. But it's still it's strange, because like there is that will sometimes make me a little suspicious of their methodology there. And so I'm always kind of like, what is the angle? What is it that they're actually, that they're really trying to like get at? What sort of emotion are they trying to stoke in the consumer who is viewing these advertisements? Or what are they trying to say back to their consumer about the current sort of, day and time that we're in? So it's just very strange to me that because I used to just not pay attention to commercials, and now I pay attention to commercials all the time. And it's also especially strange because the longer I've been in this position, the more I felt like everything is a commercial. So yeah, I may have just even given a commercial for commercials like 30 seconds. So I hope that answers your question.
I like this, because this is kind of the way I've been conceptualizing, this conversation and marketing in general. It's just about guiding attention. It's about, we talk about the brain only spends resources when it has a reason to do so. So marketing is just giving the brain reason to spend resources on things that it wouldn't otherwise have spent resources on. Pay more attention to things that it wouldn't otherwise have paid attention to. And I think that there's probably, and again, you'd know better than me, but I get a sense that there's an idea of marketing out there where people think of it as like brainwashing, is trying to make you think certain things, as opposed to what I think it really is more about. It's look around, like we're inundated with car commercials, for example, which I don't pay attention to, because I'm not buying a car. Like, it's not going to influence my decision, but it's a numbers game, right? That's the point of commercials, is that that millions of people will be seeing it, but only a few thousand or however many are the ones that will actually be looking for a car right now. And then when we were looking for a new car, all of a sudden I am paying closer attention. So rather than being like, we're trying to convince you that you need a new car and you need our car, it's more about guiding your attention to our car as an option. And if that matches up with the things you're looking for now, and you're going to want to get it.
Yes.
Well,
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Oh, go ahead.
No. Finish. Go ahead, Joe.
The car commercials are so fascinating to me, because they literally, I feel like, have not changed in the past 20, 25 years. It's always the same thing. It's like someone who is, who you do not see driving down either, depending on what make it is. They're either driving through the desert, driving through a mud field, driving along the coast, or like driving through some very inhospitable environment.
It's always vaguely post-apocalyptic. Yeah, it's weird.
Yes. And then, usually again, with all these commercials, they have like a nice voiceover, and they're like the 2000 and whatever Elantra. I used to know more about cars, but like they will say that, and it's either like a very soothing, more female sounding voice, or like a gruff, more male sounding voice.
The
that's
new
like,
Ford F-150.
Exactly. Like haul your goods in the post-apocalyptic environment with the Ford F-150. And then each of the commercials ends by showing you how much money you have to pay over the course of however many months and whatnot. And it's just funny that you say that, like, yeah, now you start paying more attention, because it is a numbers game. That's why you see so many car commercials all of the time. And they're all structured in the same way, because I think, like, truly, all the information that you'd be looking for when you are buying a car is there really at the end. The first part is more so just about sort of being more desirable and really trying to key into that specific customer that they know would be interested in the car, which is why all the pickups commercials take place in post-apocalyptic environments, and then all the luxury car commercials take place on the coast of like Ireland or something, or California or whatever.
Or in the driveway of your very fancy modern mansion.
Yes, exactly.
But that's still isolated from everybody for some reason. I don't get that part.
Well, we could get into another discussion about how I think the American dream in and of itself is isolation, or at least that's how it's been marketed for so many years. But that's maybe perhaps another conversation for another day. But you're right. I mean, like it's very much it's focused on the buyer and the family usually, particularly for car commercials that are more skewed towards, you know, the nuclear family. Buick always does this, and I know this because my parents are staunch Buick supporters. You know, they typically show families the utility of the cars, you know, like how easy it is to like parallel park and have the car do it now, which is a horrifying thing. They show like these shots in a driveway of like, you know, the 2-story house, and like it's usually someone who is going into the house, or like they're coming out to the car with their kids. Around the holidays, everybody puts the big bows on top of the cars, which is still hilarious to me, that because that's not how people get presents, you know.
Yeah, every time we see one of those commercials, my wife and I make the same joke of like, hey, I spent 40,000 of our dollars without talking to you about it. Hope you like it.
The bow cost an extra $5,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I was just basically going to say car commercials are super weird, and I both love and hate them.
I'm having fun like riffing on things with each other, you know, cutting in more, but I keep feeling like we're missing out because I step on the toe or something.
No. I mean, I'm so when Brandon talked about, you know, paying attention, and attention is a very limited resource when we're thinking about budgeting. Joe, are you saying that emotion sort of cuts through all that budgeting, like it jumps to this direct place that we don't even think about, where we might have allocated a certain amount of resources this way, and then just that feeling of need or fear or happiness gets at us, and that's how marketing works?
To me, yes, because it all flows from the emotion, and that's the clever thing about it, I guess you could say, is that most people tend to not really think about it. Obviously, when it comes to marketing and the amount of money that companies spend on marketing, the money is just a tool for all of us. And when it comes to marketing, it often it's kind of dependent on the industry specifically. If you have more money, of course, it's easier to have higher visibility for whatever ad or whatnot that you're showcasing to customers. But a good ad, a good commercial, you know, any sort of good marketing for a product or a company or whatnot is going to live and die by the story it tells. That's why people get so invested in Super Bowl commercials, because Super Bowl commercials truly, like, those are the ones that companies spend their entire year and like half of their marketing budget on creating. And it has to be, if it's not good, then it at least has to be interesting, because if it's not interesting, then people aren't going to talk about it, and it's not going to leave an impact on their brains. And, you know, that's why, like, again, another commercial from the 90s, but if there's anybody in the audience who is listening that remembers the Budweiser frogs, I mean, it's an incredibly simple but like incredibly stupid and effective commercial, because like it literally was just 3 frogs saying the name of the company, but because of the imagery and because of sort of how it plays, it worked, and it stayed in the popular consciousness for several years. And so the emotion that's there, you may be thinking like, well, what is it? They're not necessarily, you know, getting at like the fear that a customer may have of like, oh, how am I going to know which beer to pick? Oh my gosh. Oh, maybe these frogs will tell me and you know, allay my fears, or any kind of you know, sort of desire or anything like that. But there is joy and humor in that. And so that in and of itself can also, especially for a large company like Budweiser that doesn't necessarily quote unquote need the marketing. But you know, you're still looking for your ad or commercial, what have you, to leave some sort of emotional impact like that, which is why I think, you know, the Super Bowl has sort of become also the Super Bowl of marketing for a lot of companies.
Yeah. I mean, emotion is definitely more predictable on a broad scale, which marketing is, a lot of it, like you're saying, is about scale. It's a lot easier to predict how people or most people or many people will feel in response to a thing than what they'll think or what they'll do in response to a thing. You know, I think of this as a common thing, but maybe it's just another weird thing my wife and I talk about, where, you know, we'll watch commercials or shows or whatever that make us cry, even though we don't find any like value, and we're like, they pulled the right strings, it made me cry, but I know exactly what they're doing. It's not like I'm impressed by it or anything. I'm just like, good job, you hit the right buttons in the right order. we've been watching a lot of Modern Family lately. My wife likes to watch like comforting sitcoms, and these later seasons are terrible. This is not a Modern Family, but there's still times where I'm like, yeah, it's emotional. You know, if you show me a brother that like is trying to protect a younger sibling and fails, oh, I'm going to be a wreck. Like, doesn't matter how skillfully you do it. So we can more broadly predict. And you were mentioning earlier, Joe, that negative emotions are more powerful, which of course I agree with, and also easier to predict. And in the context of executive functioning and awareness, attention, Mike, like you're bringing up, we default to there's a universal truth that people are more likely to pay attention to prioritize negative things more highly than positive. That if there are 100 things in my field of view and my brain can only pay attention to 4 of them, and 3 of them are potentially going to kill me, I'm going to notice those 3 and then 1 of the other 97.
Right.
And of course we see that, you know, in politics and news and blah, blah, blah. None of this is like new information for people. But I do think of it that way. Not that it's necessarily easier to make someone emotional, but easier to predict statistically emotional reactions to stimuli than cognitive or behavioral reactions.
Yes. And then sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, this emotion and when I was LinkedIn stalking you, Joe, just to research that very, very short bio clip that I gave you, you know, I noticed one of the things that you put on your resume is that, you know, you analyze giant data sets. Like, how are you measuring these things about emotion and our responses? I mean, beyond like the efficacy of the sales, you know, that you end up selling more of this or that. Like, what are you looking at?
So that's a great question. Specifically, to provide a little bit of context to that too. So I'm one of those weird people who I feel like really enjoys and tries to utilize both. And I know this has, you know, been sort of dispelled in terms of the mythology behind it, but I'm a person who really enjoys using both my left brain and right brain, if you will. And I spent, as I said, several years kind of having part of my career in e-commerce was doing a lot of data analysis. And I was always terrible at math when I was a kid. Not terrible, but it just wasn't, I didn't take to it the same way that I took to English. You know, English, I felt like I could swim through in any which way. You know, I was backstroking, doing doggy paddle, like whatever, any other sort of like swimming styles. I can't think of, I guess freestyle. I don't know, but I could swim through English however I so chose, but then math was a little bit harder for me. I could barely sort of swim, and it took me a little bit longer to feel comfortable in the waters of math. But I still, as an adult, really kind of essentially found my way into these more, you know, analysis and analytical kind of jobs, a lot of sifting through Excel sheets and what have you. And that really served me well in my current role as well, because a lot of what branding is that I don't even really talk about because I'm more sort of obsessed with the narrative end of it, is analyzing data, particularly when it comes to customer and consumer data. And that is a big thing that I feel like I probably skimmed over a lot, is that there is a lot of market research that goes into this sort of stuff, this kind of branding process for most companies, especially if they have a lot of the money to do it before they really decide on a branding direction. And Etiquette we work with all kinds of clients of all sizes. And so they may not necessarily always have the money to do like a very large consumer study. Sometimes they'll come to us with data that they've gained in previous studies. There are a few companies, a number of them that we've worked with actually, that do ongoing studies with consumer bases that they've either kind of developed a network of, or they just run a lot of trials, essentially, both in person before the pandemic, but now, you know, digitally, just because it's something that's very easy to do in regards to market testing. And so a lot of that data goes into forming these what we call personas for customers, and that's how the bullseye consumer persona is decided upon. You know, it's just gathering data. And so the more data that you have, obviously, the more specific and informed decision you can make about who that customer is that you're trying to market to. And so the more specific you can end up being in the branding and also the story that the branding is telling. And I'll give an example because this was an Instagram ad that worked on me a week ago, and I just got it again today, and I was like, oh God, they got me. So I am, and Sarah will tell you this, I am a very clean person. I have what Sarah has mentioned as some OCD tendencies. Cleaning quite literally gives me pleasure and sets my mind at ease. And so I got hit with this Instagram ad. It was a video, and it said something to the effect of, there may be germs and bacteria in your washing machine. And so then they showed all this video footage of like dirty washing machine drums with like gunk on the sides of them, and like people cleaning out their hoses and just like wet, disgusting lint and everything inside of them. And so I saw this and I was like, oh man, I didn't even know that, that was a thing. And so of course my brain was immediately like, oh my gosh, like we rent our apartment. So I don't know how many people may have used that washing machine since the last time it was cleaned before we moved here. So I was thinking like, could there be all this bacteria that is, causing me to like break out? Like, is that why my towel that I haven't replaced in 7 years, like feeling so grimy all the time? Like all these things started, flying through my mind. And then of course, the ad went on, and the brand / company who was purveying it, introduced their product, which was this thing that you can put in your washer essentially, and it would dissolve all of the water stains, the bacteria, the growth that is sort of around your washing drum, and then flush it out so that you would have a truly clean washing machine. And I think I even asked Sarah, I was like, can we get this for our washing machine? And she's like, we don't need to spend $20 on like a packet of these things. And I was like, but we don't know what's inside our washing machine, And so I thought about it, and I was like, well, okay, I'm obviously not, I'm not getting some sort of like rash or like skin condition, I'm probably overreacting. I'm letting my sort of predisposition to making sure that things are clean get the better of me. So like maybe I let the ad kind of lean a little bit too far into my like perhaps fear of bacteria, fear of dirt, and maybe we don't need to buy this stuff. But then kind of going back to our previous point in the conversation. I saw the ad again, and I thought about it again. And I was like, oh, maybe it would be nice just to have a clean washing machine, just for peace of mind. So I'm sure that, in another month or so's time, after I see the ad 2 or 3 more times, if I see one of you, I'll be like, yeah, I got these things that clean our washing machines, and they're so great,
Yeah, I like that. And now I got to circle back in a month and see if you got them. We'll just call you on a podcast in the future. And
yeah, be like, hey, you remember when we talked about those washing machine cleaners?
I'm like building this mental list, because this is part of what I do in sessions, right? Is I track different things and what are open ended, and we can revisit blah blah. So now I'm like wanting to talk about American, the quote unquote American dream and its origins and isolation and independence, and we can, because that's helpful in terms of neurodiversity. I'm also really interested in talking about the fact that that these narratives not only play, are drawing on existing narrative, but creating and reinforcing cultural narrative. That we it's a means of staying on the same page with each other. You used Lord of the Rings as an example earlier. Pop culture is in this kind of stuff as well, where it's like, okay, you and I don't know each other, but we both know Lord of the Rings, so that enables us to communicate more effectively with one another. The same with celebrity status, right? If we both have the same reference points, then we're in the same place. Now that's problematic, especially for neurodivergent people, or really anybody that's outside of the normative population in any way, when it's reinforced by this idea that, you're supposed to do things on your own, and, this is how everybody does it, and doing it normal is doing it right, and if you don't, blah, blah, blah. But I'm also cognizant of the time, and we always are like begging people to give us practical things to do instead of just talking theory, because otherwise we'll talk theory and abstract forever. So I'll say that to people in the chat. Give us some specific questions to address while we still have 15 more minutes of Joe's time. But until and unless we get something from there, we can kind of shift it that way ourselves. And as much as I want to just break down specific commercials, this is where I'm thinking that maybe it's practical and applicable both for the conversation on marketing, but individuals. Is we've talked in the past about, I define a problem as I am aware, presently aware, not just know, not have been exposed to or knew in the past. It's in long-term memory. I am currently conscious. I'm aware of something that is different than I want it to be. And of course, that middle step, the fact that it's different, is based on my perception, right? So that gives us 4 variables to manipulate. And of course, I'm always focused on manipulating those variables in terms of making a problem less of a problem, that we can become less aware of it. We can change the material condition of the thing to be more like we want it to be. We can change our perception of it without changing it at all to be more like we want it to be, or we can change what we want it to be to come more in line with our perception of what's existing. But if you think of marketing in these terms, that it's the other way around, right? That it's still those 4 variables. That Budweiser, for example, is not creating a problem, right? They're not saying like you should want a beer. They're just making you aware of the fact that you could have a beer. You already knew that you could have a beer, but you weren't aware of it in the moment. So your laundry, your washing machine thing there, right? The material conditions of the washing machine did not change whatsoever. Whatever was existing before is the same as what was existing after. But your perception of it changed, and your awareness, the level of awareness that you have about it changed. And the reason I call these problems is because the more aware you are of something, the more uncomfortable that thing is making you. The brain wants to conserve resources. So if it's spending resources being aware of something, it wants to address that so it can compress it, right? Or eliminate it. So, that I wonder how much that translates, on a marketing level, but I want to apply it for people individually too, of how do you isolate or test those 4 different variables from one another? Coca-Cola is not convincing anybody that Coca-Cola is better than Pepsi. They're just reminding people who like Coca-Cola, hey, you could be having a Coca-Cola right now. You're just increasing awareness.
Yes. And very often, I love what you said about perception too, because in terms of what I was speaking about in regards to that sort of emotional core of advertising and marketing, a lot of it is geared very much to, especially in like the washing machine example, changing your perception on some, both the problem and the product, as it were, because that's really, I think, how you're going to get the consumer on your side, if you will. If I could use another quick example, the brand that I always talk about, because I'm fully on board, I've been assimilated, and I think Brandon, we even talked about them, is the shoe company Allbirds, because their approach is essentially saying like, hey, we're making this shoe, this product that is extremely comfortable, in my opinion, but in their opinion as well, obviously. And then on top of that, they make it using materials that are, more sustainable than sort of the main line of the industry, like the Nikes and Reeboks of the world. And they're very transparent about even a larger problem, which kind of hooks into their values of sustainability and climate change, so much so that I think it was this year, they essentially made this like guidebook for companies to measure their carbon footprint, their like yearly carbon footprint. And they made that available as a free resource to everybody. So because they are sort of shifting in their marketing and in their sort of product and the reasons to believe in the product, they're shifting the perception about the problems that they're solving. That gets the customer to also think about those things and say like, oh, well, if I buy this shoe, not only am I getting something that is sort of serving me and solving a problem for me on a more immediate level, but I'm also solving a problem on a more macro level. That is something that affects not just myself, but arguably everyone else on the world as well, or in some limited capacity. But that is sort of the gist of what they're trying to do and why they, I think, put so much focus on that from their marketing. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Joseph, we have a commenter in the stream asking, you mentioned that you had a conversation with Sarah who pulled you back from buying that washing machine cleaner, and they're wondering what are some good ways that we can sort of fact check some of these impulses and controls that get triggered by ads. Not to put yourself out of business, but.
Oh, no, that's a great question, actually, because I mean that's a thing that I always try to be very cognizant of as well. I think that when you see an ad, and this is very difficult to do because we have all grown up in, as Brandon was saying earlier, a culture that really we grew up in a capitalist culture, so it's very much prioritizes all of our continual exposure to advertising, to marketing, to get us to consume things. There's an excellent movie that is about this very thing. It's sort of a weird schlocky horror movie called They Live. If anybody knows of it, you should watch it. But I would just challenge yourself when you see an advertisement and you feel yourself responding to it. You're like, oh my gosh, that product looks, it looks really cool and I really want it, or like it can definitely solve this problem for me that I have, et cetera, et cetera. I would just kind of take a second and say like, okay, what is it that my brain is sort of doing, and like what sort of emotion is being triggered right now that this advertisement may be hitting on, that is causing me to love that little text tone, that is causing me to think in this way and sort of respond in this way, and then really kind of ask yourself, like, do I, as Sarah sort of asked me, do I really need this thing? Is it actually something that is truly going to improve my life or my standing in a significant way that like really means that I should buy it? Like, for example, if I see a commercial for food and I'm hungry and I have not eaten yet, does that mean that I'm, let's say it's a McDonald's commercial, does that mean that I'm going to like go out and run to get McDonald's to, satisfy my hunger? Not necessarily. Does it mean that I should eat and perhaps should get food from my kitchen? Yes. But if it's something that is a little bit more, not as vital to your continued existence on this planet, then I would start to interrogate the emotions that the ad is caused to stir in you, and then also what you think the ad may be doing to you. And I should also say, like, this is not a very easy thing to do, and it may also drive you a little crazy because it makes both advertisements, and then I also think, in sort of broader extension, narratives a little less fun to kind of get lost in. But yeah, it's also taken me a long time, and the only reason that I'm as aware of it as I am is because I've been fortunate enough in my job to really kind of start to reverse engineer a lot of things when it comes to advertising and marketing, and so it's really just sort of about thinking about it from a different end of your perception of it, I guess.
And when I say you, I don't mean you personally, but it's become so easy to jump on those impulses, right? You could one click to buy, you just about to press one button. You don't even need to check out in the cart anymore. Brandon, what are some like executive functioning strategies that we can use to check ourselves, especially when it's so easy to click that button to order that Big Mac?
Yeah, well, I was going to call out somebody in the chat, and then I realized that it's Sarah in the chat suggested this, but it's a good one, that she doesn't allow herself to buy something until at least an hour has passed after the impulse to buy, which, by the way, also has a benefit if you're shopping online to put something in the cart and then leave the website, because then they might send you like discounts and things.
It's very true.
So this is why I like the cost and value stuff that we always talk about, because one way to get you to do something is to up the value. Hey, your washing machine is filthy. Now it's more important for you. One way to get more people to do things is to lower the cost. It's so easy for you to get and do this thing. No matter how, if you thought that the washing machine was that dirty, but the solution they proposed was, okay, you got to take it apart. It's going to take 3 days. You'd be like, no, I'm not. But if it's convenient, right? So yeah, they're lowering cost. And I do like having simple rules and heuristics like Sarah just suggested there, where you don't have to think very deeply. You just say, nope, I wait an hour. If I'm still thinking about it then. That one, by the way, very helpful for ADHD people who will very easily forget about things. So it will winnow a lot out. But also in response, from the kind of my side of things to that earlier question of how do you fact check? Well, one thing that Joe's talking about, we would put in terms we call reality checking, which is just talk to somebody else. Express to somebody else what it is you're thinking and feeling, and then they can give you feedback on, oh yeah, that totally makes sense, I'm with you. Or like, no, that's ridiculous. And they might not be right or wrong or correct or, accurate or whatever any more than you are. But the more, there's a reason that you do the market research, right? The more people that you get to give feedback on a thing, the more you can get a sense of a consensus around like the most commonly useful or commonly accurate things. Another way to look at this is, because I talk about problems as what we already said, right? That includes things that are great, but I would like them to be even greater. So I can't use problem to mean just bad stuff. So here's a way to break down some of what Joe was talking about, just some language to use. When there's a problem, whether it's been evoked by an advertisement or whatever, when you're having a problem, you can assess for what the root in the problem is. And here are 3 things that usually are going to come up. 1, harm. It is currently and actively causing difficulty, increasing the cost of things or blocking access to things, right? That if I have a headache, the problem is that my head hurts and I want it to stop. If I am meeting somebody and they don't show up, I am currently spending time sitting here waiting that I could spend elsewhere, right? That's a bad thing. We've talked about negative aims in the past too. So there's harm. Then another category is markers, which is it's not actually a problem in and of itself, but it gives you more reason to think that another problem might be happening later. So health, everything health related falls under this category. We can't actually say that if I eat, X amount of vegetables and whatever, that I will definitely have a healthier and more energetic and longer life than somebody who doesn't do that healthy habit or eats a bunch of junk food. But we have this statistical understanding that it's more likely. So if I'm doing that, it's because I think if I do something healthy, if I abstain from doing unhealthy things, then it's a marker to me that later on I'm more confident that things will go well. And the flip side, that if I'm doing the unhealthy things or if unhealthy things are happening around me, even if it's not hurting me in that moment, it's a marker that makes me think this makes it more likely I'll be harmed later. So that can be real important, especially in the washing machine analogy, or not analogy, example that you just used, right? Now you have a new marker. Oh, we haven't washed the washing machine in a while. That's a marker that now makes me think it's more likely that bad things will happen in the future, even though nothing currently that I can tell is happening that I don't like. So sometimes that matters. Markers are good. They're important. You should pay attention to healthy habits, but you also have to understand their limited utility, that there's not a right way, right? So ask yourself in that moment of how important is it that I do it? Is it causing a problem right now? Or is it just making me think that it's more likely, accurately or not, that there will be a problem later? And then another category of problem is lost benefit, that the minute that I make you believe, again, accurately or not, that something could be better than it currently is, which you're not likely to have thought of before, because how could you? I'm just teaching, I'm telling you. If I right now, Mike and Joe, if I was able to convince you that, hey, by the way, did you know that there's this new pill that makes it so that you will never get sick at all? If that was something I could convince you is true, immediately you now have a problem that you haven't had that pill yet, because it would be better. So if I give you a sense of give you an awareness that something could be better than it currently is, you'll think about it. But again, all those are different categories, and of course, more or less intense. You're going to respond differently. I think a lot of what you're talking about, Joe, and what I'm talking about is coming out of the emotion and into more cognition in response to things. That, oh yeah, what if my house gets broken into? I should, get a security system. And then you step back and think, well, I haven't ever had a security system and my house has never been broken into. What are the chances that that's, and even if it does, what are the, is the security system going to stop somebody? Actually, an interesting marketing and psychological thing in the security industry, they have research that shows that the biggest deterrent of your security system is the sign that if people are looking to break into houses and will be deterred because they're not going for your specific house, so therefore will be deterred from a more difficult to break into house with a security system. As long as you have the sign, they're like, okay, don't do that one. They're not going to investigate, is this actually true? They just move along to the next. Haha, security alarm industry exposed you.
So there you go. All you need is just to put an ADT sign out in your front yard, and you don't need to buy a security system.
Yeah. We talk all the time about advantageous and disadvantageous variations, and so ADHD, this is one of those where it can be advantageous. There are plenty of times, and we're all very aware of the times that it's disadvantageous to forget something and move on to something else quickly. Here's one where it can be advantageous that, oh gosh, I'm so scared about my house being broken into, until 5 minutes later, I'm like, oh, what? Right? Oh, yeah, there was that commercial. I forgot.
Right. Yeah. And that's one quick thing to add on to that too, is that when it comes to advertising, and Mike, what you mentioned about, making it easier for people to just go, especially on social media, to just sort of purchase things with one click. Companies do rely on that all the time, constantly, for their potential customers to be in what we sort of refer to as the funnel, and with a lot of advertisements, particularly on the internet, the goal is to get them into that purchase funnel, where once they see the ad, they hope that you click on the ad to go through their website to sort of be exposed to the company mission and the value props and whatnot. and then to, you know, essentially add it to your cart and buy it. And so I think, yeah, the sort of reality check that you had mentioned, I love that phrase just because I didn't even realize that is exactly what happened in the story with Sarah and I and the washing machine cleaner, is that if you make sure that you sort of check yourself before you check out yourself, then you know you will probably save a bunch of money from Instagram purchases.
There's that marketing genius right there.
Yeah, there you go.
I know we got to go. I just really quickly want to share a model for people, and I won't go into detail about it. On decision making, it's cost and value, right? And under each of those categories are things that I'm currently noticing and things that I don't notice. Meaning, what it costs me, what I notice of that is the resources I'm going to have to expend on it, how much money, whatever. What I don't tend to notice unless I take time to notice it is what we call opportunity costs. What could I do with those resources instead? Under the value side, it's what is the problem, what is going wrong right now that I want to be better, you'll automatically notice. But to think about what is already not a bad thing, but could be even better, you know, the lost benefit side is the part that takes that extra stuff. So try and let go of what should a thing cost, you know, and get more into evaluating of what it's going to cost me. What's the value I get out of it? Is it worth it? Because different things are worth it for different people.
Love that.
Well, thank you both thank you for so much for sharing all this. Joe, thank you for spending an hour with us here on the Effective Artistry podcast. And, you know,
Absolutely.
Thank you to thanks for all the audience members for joining us today. We are planning on taking a break next week, where we, depending on Brandon's baby situation, might or might not be here. Yeah, we might or might not be here. But, you know, I hope that you guys will all join us next time for our next episode, where we'll be featuring another guest, another topic. Brandon, Joe, thank you for your time. Audience, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just
Thanks,
to
guys.
clarify, you know, I will be out one of these weeks. It could be as early as next week. We don't know when. But the stream will still happen. It just won't be the podcast. And Mike and potentially Sarah or somebody else will be here running the stream. So keep showing up every week. We'll be here every week. I'm going to miss one of them.
Yeah.
Thank you for the chat, the well wishes on the baby. Thank you.